Welcome to the Viking Age podcast. It's the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. My name is Chris Schad. I write for Fansided and Zone Coverage, and we do this right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel once every week. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day, but however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. Now, today's guest, you can find his work over at the Wide Left Substack. His name was Arif Hasan. And Arif, you were just at the Combine, so I need to ask, are you following Jordan Schultz against Ian Rappaport at WrestleMania? Or do you have an undercard spot? Are you managing one of them? Like, what's the plan after? Because it seems like there's a pretty good feud to like base that off of.
Yeah, of course. No. I mean, this is actually great because it allows me to write WrestleMania off as a business expense, so that I can make sure that I follow my favorite, NFL insiders. Yeah, no, it was like a kind of a crazy moment in media. I wasn't there at the moment it happened, of course. First reported by, from all people, PFT commenter. That Jordan Schultz had confronted Ian Rappaport, and it sounds like all kinds of accusations were thrown around. None of them are corroborated, of course, so I take everything with a grain of salt. But, the idea that I think Ian Rappaport accused Jordan Schultz of offering his sources Uber stock or something like that. I don't know what's going on. Obviously, Ian and Schultz have had a little bit of a testy relationship. I think prior to this report, it was something like, whether or not Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady had intentionally met at a ski lodge in Montana, or if it was, happenstance, right? So crazy NFL insider stuff. It doesn't concern me. But of course, as soon as a media fight happens, I want to know as much as I can about it. What's crazy is that Ian Rappaport did make a showing at one of the bars that a lot of NFL insiders, scouts, reporters, and stuff frequent at the Combine, Prime 47. It was only for a mere moment, but he started talking to the person that was like literally right behind me, so I could just hear it. And essentially he confirmed that it all happened as reported. He was like, wow, what a crazy night I've had. And the other person was like, yeah, why are you talking to me about it? It was outstanding stuff. One of the more exciting Combine events I've seen in quite a while.
I mean, what's wrong with it's just two dudes who just enjoy black diamonds, really. Matthew Stafford, just coming down.
Of course. They just love skiing, and specifically in the state of Montana.
It was like the Dumb and Dumber scene where Harry and Mary Swanson are like coming down, and like, I don't know, maybe that's what ended the deal. Tom Brady like got too aggressive in the snowball fight, and
that has to be, actually, that's a good, someone should dig into that. I think that's a really good intuition there. That is probably the snowball fight that ended the relationship. That's why Matthew Stafford re-signed with the Rams.
We got it. We got our own scoops here on the Viking Age podcast, but we'll dive into that a little bit later. We can save that for another day. I want to do a free agency preview for the Vikings, and I think we got to start at the quarterback position because somehow this thing doesn't have a resolution yet. Sam Darnold, apparently he's not dead yet. The Vikings did not use the franchise tag on Sam Darnold or anyone else for that matter. He will be a free agent when the period opens next week, and several sources are not ruling out a return to the Vikings. Let me just ask you that. Is this agent speak, or do you think there's really a chance Sam Darnold can come back to the Vikings?
Always a chance, of course. I don't want to rule it out. But to me, it seems unlikely. And these new reports actually don't change my mind too much. A lot of these reports emerged, I want to say 2-3 days ago, like around March 4th, March 3rd. And the reason I think that that's an important thing to point out is that was before Matthew Stafford agreed to re-sign with the Rams. And the timing on that is important because it was like later on March 4th that was announced. Timing on that is important because two of the teams that would be in the Sam Darnold chase, the Raiders and the Giants, may have thought that they were going to be in a really good position trading for Matthew Stafford, and so we're not that aggressive about pursuing Sam Darnold. This is just me kind of speculating, but also kind of trying to relate to people that the timeline of these things does matter. I don't know if this is true, but it could be the case that either of these teams or both of these teams did not think that they needed to be in that market, and so were not part of the pseudo negotiations that occur every year at the NFL Combine for impending free agents, people like Sam Darnold. And so it may have seemed like Sam Darnold's market was pretty cool at the time a lot of these reports came out, which means that the Vikings, who I had always maintained were going to offer Sam Darnold something. may have seemed like the clubhouse leader, right? The leader to land Sam Darnold with what I would argue amounts to an underpay. My guess is the Vikings would have offered him something less than his market value. Now, my guess was 35 million. Alec Lewis published a piece a couple of days ago that suggested that it was also potentially 35 million. So there's an offer there, and I would expect that to be below the market for him, which I would expect to be around 40 million. Now, you bring up a really good point about how this could be agent speak, and the reason that that's important is because an agent wants to make it such the case that there are as many teams as possible vying for his client services because that'll increase the price. You have a larger number of bidders. And so if they say, hey, the Vikings are genuinely interested in re-signing Sam Darnold. So if you really want to pry him away from Minnesota, where he succeeded and he's got all of these reasons to stay, you're gonna have to pony up, right? Because if he wants to stay in the situation that put him in such a really good spot, he might take a couple $1 million discount so that by his next contract, he's going to make even more money. So you're going to have to offer something really substantial if you want to overcome that several $1 million discount that he'd be willing to stay at home for. So we have to be aware of these kind of meta games that agents may play that will result in a lot of reports that'll come from insiders. It's not ever as cut and dry as it seems, which really sucks because you always want to trust these reports coming out as the genuine pieces of news that they are. But because of that, because of the trust that we tend to have in these people, that allows agents and teams both to start kind of using them to start playing games out in public so that they can change the negotiating leverage. So I think there's a lot that's potentially at play here.
And that's, I think, why I get so triggered at some of these analysts who are just, I think Chase Daniel, who now works with The Athletic, he's on the Scoop City podcast. He tweeted the other day, he's like, the Vikings are just going to let 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns walk out the door. It's like, oh, like the last guy that was here? Because it just, like, the Vikings are making an offer. They're not just being like, well, I lost your number. Like, what happened?
What's going on?
That's crazy. Like, oh, yeah, well, good luck. We're not. No,
yeah,
I mean,
they gave Kirk Cousins a number, and my understanding is that the number that they gave Cousins was very similar to the number that the Atlanta Falcons gave, and Cousins basically left for two reasons: one, because he wanted a larger proportion of that number guaranteed, but two, primarily and unfortunately, ironically, because he wanted to be the main guy. He wanted to be the starter, and the Vikings were not going to promise him that, and they were very upfront and honest that they were not going to promise him that. Sounds like the Falcons may have misled Kirk Cousins on that front. And so Cousins just became part of a team that ended up drafting a first-round quarterback, which, sucks for him. But yeah, the Vikings made an offer for Cousins, and it didn't work out because the offer wasn't as good as another offer, and that doesn't have to be about dollars and cents. An offer can be better for a number of reasons, whether that's situation or guarantee, or Cousins, his wife has family in Georgia, right? So that was also a compelling reason. And I think his dad now preaches at a church in Florida, which is really close by too. So that could also be part of the offer, or essentially that a team can package together. And so, yeah, the Vikings made an offer, and I think they made a competitive offer for Cousins. And I think the same thing will happen here, that they'll make an offer, not letting, like you said, Sam Darnold walk out the door. And if they are, I feel like if anybody in the league has earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to quarterback decisions, it's Kevin O'Connell. If he is going to be the one that makes the decision between Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy, until it goes sideways, I'm going to trust it. And, the Vikings might say, hey, there's a lot of value to bringing Sam Darnold in and keeping him here, but that value reaches a limit, and we're not going to go over that value. We're going to trust that we've got, a situation set up for JJ McCarthy that's going to let him succeed. So I don't know. It's weird the way that people have approached a lot of this, because nobody wanted Sam. Everyone was upset with the Sam Darnold signing for the Vikings. People thought it was a bad idea.
I'm going to toot my own horn. This is the quarterback you deserve, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to toot my own horn here and say I liked the signing. I clearly didn't like it enough, but I liked the signing, and everyone was mad about it. And now it's like, you can't let that walk out of the door. Hey, man, be consistent.
I remember the night of, and I think it dropped at 10:30 at night. And I looked at my phone. I'm like, well, people aren't going to like that.
Yeah.
Everybody was asleep, and I'm like, people are going to wake up and see the Vikings sign Sam Darnold and freak out. And it's just I even think I just posted a video. I'm like, guys, Sam Darnold's not going to be the long-term starting quarterback. Calm down. This is just the Vikings are going to draft a quarterback. They're going to be fine. Here's the thing with all of this. And you mentioned it too. Kevin O'Connell deserves the benefit of the doubt. And he knows more than anybody knows in the NFL about JJ McCarthy and Sam Darnold right now, where he may look at JJ McCarthy and be like, could he use another year? Sure. But I'm not desperate to bring Sam Darnold back just to make sure, the guy's ready. I mean, if I got to roll with JJ McCarthy and Daniel Jones, if that's the 1-2 we got to go with, I'm totally fine with that. I think he's gone through all these scenarios in his head. And, looking at this decision from Sam's perspective, it is possible he could look at the other places and go like, hey, Minnesota's the best option for me. I know I could get more money, but I'm going to, I could find myself in a better position 1 year from now. If I go back, I start for the Vikings one more year, which would be an absolute pressure cooker, by the way, because the second he has a Jacksonville game, there's going to be like JJ McCarthy chants at the, I almost called it the Metronome. I don't know why, but US Bank Stadium, people are going to be screaming for JJ McCarthy, but the infrastructure is there. He knows the coaching staff. He knows all that other stuff. I mean, there is a world where he looks at the Raiders and goes, there's nobody there. He looks at the Giants and be like, didn't you laugh at Jaden Daniels? And then, the Titans, it's like, okay, your quarterback currently eats mayo for fun. Like, looking all around the league, and he just goes, I'm going to go back to Minnesota and I'm going to rehash his value. That might be agent malpractice, but maybe that's what Darnold wants to do.
Yeah, no, I think that all makes sense. One thing we have to keep in mind, though, is that these players, to get to the NFL, you have to have an extraordinary amount of confidence in yourself, right? And you have to have a lot of trust in your own capability and ability to succeed. And at every level, people have doubted you. More people have doubted you than have supported you. And the numbers doubt you, right? The odds of you making it from high school to, Division I college football, the odds of you making it from Division I college football to the NFL, the odds of you making it to a second contract, all of those are remarkably low odds, and they've beaten the odds every time. And so they've got a lot of evidence, for their own extraordinary self-confidence, enough for them to make decisions that might be against their best interest. But from the perspective of, I know how to get this done, I'm an elite player, I can prove my worth, you might diminish from that perspective. You might diminish the importance of the situation. Earlier today, I was on the Minnesota Football Party, and we brought Ron Johnson, and I asked him, hey, what's the biggest regret that players seem to have in free agency? And the biggest regret that they have is that they leave a good situation, right? And I think that the reason that players may leave a good situation is because they have so much confidence in themselves that they think that they can succeed no matter what the circumstances. And that may be true for Darnold, who has shown a lot of growth and development without Kevin O'Connell over the past couple of years, and then, of course, with O'Connell, right? And he might be able to say, well, I've gotten those lessons, and I can take those lessons with me and go somewhere. And this is my opportunity to get as much generational wealth for my family as possible, right? I was on a rookie contract, then I was moved around, and then I signed a $10 million deal. It's just not the same thing as a $40 million deal. And so if I'm deciding between $35 million a year for 3 years and $40 million a year for 4 years, I might choose that second option because of how much more that kind of helps develop my nest egg and secures things for my family and stuff like that. So all of those may impact a player's decision in ways that maybe long-term you could potentially regret from the outside looking in. But if you're Sam Darnold and you were like the number one recruit or whatever, you go to USC, you're a top 3 pick in the NFL, and you were at an objectively bad organization that a lot of people have succeeded from as soon as they left, right? You can say, well, the reason I failed there is actually not my fault. I know I can go somewhere and succeed, right? I was really good for the last 6 games in Carolina. I was all right as a backup in San Francisco. I was an elite level player in Minnesota. I'm going to go to Tennessee and I'm going to show them what for, right? I'm going to show them what it's like to have a real quarterback. Because who do they have? They have Will Levis. I could do better than Will Levis. I could do better than Malik Willis, right? And probably he can, honestly. But that kind of confidence can push you into these decisions where maybe it was better to be in a situation where you've got Christian Darrisaw and Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison helping you. You've got Kevin O'Connell calling plays for you. You've got Wes Phillips designing offenses for you. All of those may be kind of hidden background factors that they may not consider. Maybe they do, and maybe Sam Darnold will take a $5 million per year pay cut, a $2 million per year pay cut, maybe even a $10 million per year pay cut to be in a better situation because that'll produce the best third contract for him. I don't know. But that's something that we have to keep in mind, is that these players have a different perspective than we do when it comes to a lot of these decisions, especially if you get to be the franchise savior. There's a lot of emotional benefit to being the one that gets to rebuild a franchise. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it.
Gun ahead, where do you think Sam Darnold ends up?
Las Vegas. I think that it would be really difficult. I know that the Raiders are thinking about Rodgers, or I shouldn't say no. I've heard tell. I don't know how substantiated the rumors are because it's like I read a tweet and I don't know if it's sourced, so take it with a grain of salt. But very much seems like a lot of people are connecting Rodgers and the Raiders, and it's something I want to pay attention to. But I don't know that the Raiders are in a position to trade up for a quarterback in the draft. I don't think that with all the stuff we're hearing about, whether it's Jackson Dart or Tyler Shuck or Jalen Milroe, whoever. I don't think actually that they're a first round prospect by the NFL standards. We'll see if I'm wrong. Um, and in that circumstance, if they don't get Cam Ward or Sanders, and I think they may know by the time free agency opens how likely that is, they may want to establish and grab a quarterback, right? And so they might want, somebody like a Sam Darnold, right? And so that seems correct to me. It seems like they've got a little bit of money to work with in that front. They definitely think that they're closer than a lot of people would put them, and they just want that quarterback to kind of, substantiate that. The defense has gotten a lot better kind of quietly over the past 2 years, and the offense is the part that failed them. And so if they think that they have the ability to compete sooner rather than later, like, yeah, and maybe they could pair them with a second or third round quarterback. Like they might still end up with a Jackson Dart or a Tyler Shuck or any of these other guys that people are interested in just later on in the draft.
Well, we'll have to wait on Sam Darnold's final decision, but we may have had one free agent decision made today. The Minnesota Vikings agreed to a 2-year, $12.6 million contract with Theo Jackson today. And if you're sitting there going like, wait, that sounds like starter money. That's by design, guys, because the Athletics' Alec Lewis reported Cam Bynum is likely to leave in free agency. They've been talking about a contract since the beginning of the year, but they haven't been able to come onto a price. So, is this move a surprise to you? Because it seems like Theo Jackson has kind of been groomed for this role, whether it be Harrison Smith or Cam Bynum leaving. It seems like they're in a pretty good position, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it sounds like Andrew Kramer at the Star Tribune reported that he's getting his tender, which is I don't know if it's original round, second round, or first round, and that matters because that's the difference between like maybe $3 million and $6 million plus 2 years on top of that, which I think is $6 million per year. That's really close to the contract that Josh Metellus signed, who is functionally a starter, right? And so I think that that's a good instinct to think about it in terms of like how this will affect the other potential safety decisions. So if the Vikings know that Harrison Smith is more likely to retire than not, that kind of leaves the Vikings in an interesting spot safety wise. And so there is the possibility that you could squeeze some room in for someone like a Cam Bynum, who's a much more traditional safety than Josh Metellus. But I think more likely than not, that's going to push him out the door because his expected market is, I predicted 14. I think PFF has him at 14.25 million. We'll see if he reaches 15 million. I saw a statistic going out there about how there's only 6 safeties at $15 million per year. And, look at the attributes of all these 6 safeties. Cam Bynum is another level. But like the thing about that is the cap increases every year. And so the contracts go up every year. So it's not 1-to-1. I wouldn't be shocked if Bynum signs for quite a bit of money somewhere else. But I don't think that 100% closes the door. It sounds like there's some reporting that it kind of does, which is understandable. But I wouldn't be completely off that train yet. I just think that we should emotionally prepare for him to leave, but not necessarily say that it is a certainty, right? So I don't know. Jackson has been really excellent in training camp, really excellent. I believe he's a waiver addition off of his rookie year. He was cut from his original team, a 6th-round pick, and he was a waiver addition. He's been on the Vikings ever since. He's been great, and we were able to see him in games a little bit. He picked off Jalen Hurts, and he's been, fantastic in games. And so the Vikings say, hey, we've seen enough. We think that you're good enough to play a really substantial role. Whatever the money is, that's certainly not, pure backup money. That's at the very minimal, a heavy rotation guy, if not a starter. And that's what Josh Metellus was, right? And so there are plans for Theo Jackson in this defense. What that means kind of down the road for some of these other safeties, I don't know, but the Vikings have rolled with a lot of 3 safety packages, and that's something we want to keep in mind when we talk about the future of the defensive back group. But I think more likely than not, yeah, Cam Bynum's probably out, especially because the Vikings may have 60 odd plus $1 million allocated to them in salary cap space, but they have a lot of departing free agents, and so it's not really the same as like the Patriots 100 million, right? It's going to be difficult to add everybody that people want to add.
And I mean, it is interesting because there is a name that the Vikings have been connected to a little bit in Javon Holland on the free agent market. But I think the more likely scenario is that that money is going to be used for Byron Murphy Jr. Is this a even better move considering that they will want to bring Byron Murphy Jr. back to the fold?
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we view the Vikings as more cap constrained than I think national media do, and I would, um, yeah, I think that finding a way to keep Byron Murphy around is smart, especially because they might be able to grab a higher level cornerback than I think a lot of people would expect to pair with him. So there's always like the possibility of like a DJ Reed, right? Or some other names have been floated around. Carlton Davis from the Lions would be an interesting, excellent ad. In which case you wouldn't really have a true CB1. You've got a really good secondary, and that's a really big improvement over last year, where you had a really functional secondary, which is not the same as a good one. I think that being able to free up space from safety to corner is generally a pretty good move. I know safety is a little bit more of an important position in the Vikings defense, given how versatile, everybody is supposed to be. But it is something to kind of consider is that, hey, this might be a move that overall improves that secondary group, even if you might have to take a step back at safety, as good as Theo Jackson probably is. But yeah, I mean, given kind of the contract projections for Byron Murphy, which are way more than I expected. I thought he'd be a $15 million guy. PFF has him at 17. Spotrac has him at like 22,
Yeah.
which is wild to me. But he's a pretty good player. I know that saying that about a Pro Bowler is like, maybe damning by faint praise, but I wouldn't say that he played up to the level that we typically expect of a Pro Bowl cornerback, but I don't want to disparage him. I thought that he played well. I thought he played better than Gilmore. I thought he played better than Griffin, who actually, if they brought Griffin back, I wouldn't be upset. Just think that probably as a backup, that'd be a better idea, but he played well. But yeah, I mean, he was the best cornerback, but it wasn't like a Sauce Gardner, right? Like I
Right.
think there's an important distinction to be made there, and I don't want the Vikings to be in a spot where they massively overpay someone who is very good, but not like elite.
And I mean, these contracts too, they do find ways that, maybe it's a 1 or 2 year contract, really, but it's like a 4 year. So like you
Yeah,
get 4 2 years, then that third year you can kind of decide, okay, we're not really getting 22 million from you. We can kind of decide to move on. It's one way for Byron Murphy to make money, and you can too, because I mean, do you want to win up to 1,000 times your money? Of course you do, because you can do it at Underdog Fantasy. To play, just choose whether a player will go higher or lower on their stats, such as points, assists, rebounds, and more. They've got all of your favorite leagues, teams, and stars to choose from. I've been getting in on the game lately. I went higher on Jaden McDaniels' points during the Wolves win over the Hornets last night. We've also got the Minnesota Wild coming down the stretch. You can play some shots on goal, and we got baseball season heating up, where I go higher or lower on pitching outs whenever I'm watching the Twins at night. That is a fun thing to do too, and you can get into the game as well. Just go ahead, download the Underdog app, sign up now with the promo code The Age. It's all one word. You see it at the bottom of the screen, and you unlock a special offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Join in on the fun when you sign up with the promo code The Age. Once again, all one word, and you claim your special offer today and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly upon your first deposit. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. If you are concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP 253342. And in Arizona, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY, which is 467-369. All right. So we kind of went over the Viking news over the past week. But of course, next week's going to be the big week, because that is when free agency begins. The legal tampering window, which technically opened at the NFL scouting combine, that opens on Monday, where you'll start to hear all the deals start to flow in. Let's ask you, Arif, what should be the main objective of the Minnesota Vikings in free agency this year?
Man, so I think a lot of people view this as kind of a binary. That there's two essential approaches here. One is to be really strategic and efficient and smart with your money, and of course, everyone wants to always be smart with your money. But what that implies is not spending too much in free agency, investing a lot in a bunch of different players that may provide more return for their value. And then there's the other, like, make sure that you make a huge splash in free agency, make sure that you've got like these stars that are almost guaranteed to hit, which I want to emphasize the almost. A bunch of big signings don't go the way people think they do. But I think that really what needs to happen here is that, yeah, of course, the Vikings need to make some smart signings here. I wouldn't be shocked if they tried to replicate some of the really smart signings they've made in the past, whether that is Jonathan Ballard, somebody like a Jerry Tillery, who I don't think the Vikings are going to re-sign, but I thought that was a really good signing, and I wasn't super fond of it at the time. I thought it turned out really well. Some of these signings, Andrew Van Ginkel is maybe the perfect example of a really efficient signing, right? And then, we've seen some of their splash signings work out really well. I think Jonathan Grenard is a really good example of a splash signing. And I think they want to continue that, or I think they should continue that. I think that they need to make some really big signings because, you don't win the NFL by having the best wins above replacement over salary cap dollars, right? You win by having the most talent. And the best way to do that is to be efficient in some areas and less efficient in other areas, because that's the only way you're going to max out the total cap, is that you have to be less efficient in like wins per dollar or whatever you want to call it. And you need to make some splash signings. And some of these big players will be big contributors to teams that end up, going far in the playoffs. I mean, you take a look at the Eagles. They obviously had really outstanding off seasons when it comes to a couple of the draft picks that they made over the past 4 years. Those are big parts, but they also made really big free agent signings both in 2017 and this year that were big parts of their success. They made a big trade for AJ Brown. It would be impossible for us to argue that wasn't a big part of their success this year. So I think they need to mix a lot of that in, and whether that is to make a splash signing at an unsexy position like guard. We think Vikings fans might disagree that is actually a very sexy position. But make a splash signing at a position like guard, or even make a bigger signing at a position that maybe that we're a little bit more attuned to nationally, something like a cornerback, right? Something like that. I think that they need to really dive into what looks like a window that opened a little bit sooner than a lot of us thought. Of course, make some smart signings. Find more Andrew Van Ginkels. No one would ever be opposed to finding more Andrew Van Ginkels. But you're not going to win with a team full of that, right? Which it's tough to say. I love him, right? But you need some extraordinary star power. Very rarely are you in a situation where you make one of those efficient, smart signings and they turn out to be a star. And I think Blake Cashman is maybe an example of that. Obviously, nationally, people don't recognize him as a star. I think you watch him play, you see him play at a borderline elite level. That's the one of the few situations where it's like, we made an efficient, great dollar per value signing, and it turned out even better than we thought. Fantastic. But I think they need to make some splashes.
And I think it's not as simple as, some fans make it out to be, where it's like, Trey Smith is the number one guard. You got to give him $25 million. Like, even you mentioned Jonathan Grenard was a splash signing, which is true. But I think a lot of casual Viking fans are like, who is that? Like, nobody had heard of Jonathan Grenard before last season. And then he comes on and has that monster year for the Vikings. Be like, oh, that contract's a bargain. Like,
yeah.
It's not about playing money ball. It's about identifying talent and then going and getting that talent. And maybe even, in some cases, making that your splash signing. A guy like Milton Williams, I look at him, and he's a hell of a player. I mean, he's super athletic. He's freaky. And if the Vikings want to throw a truck full of cash at him, that's totally fine. I also think of who was the guy. Now I have to remember who it was. Denver Broncos 2015 defensive line. Was it Malik Jackson was his name? Was that because he signed with the Jaguars and then he didn't really do much. And I mean, when you watch the Super Bowl, you could be like, all right, Milton Williams is a dude. Like, you can watch the tape, you can go back and you can see that. But I mean, I think the Vikings, especially when it comes to guard, it's like Will Fries is the number one guy that everybody wants. But is a guy like Patrick McCarry better? Is a guy like is it worth upgrading the center position? Because every year we come into free agency, be like, God, got to keep Garrett Bradbury. I mean, he's smart. He knows the offense. Like, there's not a better thing on the free agent market or the draft. Then we get to November and he's getting like F5 by Kenny Clark. We'll be like, get him out of here, shoot him into the sun. What are we doing here? Like, it's a combination. Be smart, but also get the right guys in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what I want to caution people, of course, is not to fall in love with players, right? Because there's, like a 1 in 30 chance. I mean, obviously not actually a 1 in 30 chance, but think that there's 31 other teams that a player is leaving. The odds that your favorite team is going to sign your favorite player that is not already on the team, relatively low. And you need to be pretty honest about that with yourself. Every GM misses in free agency. Every GM, shoots a bullet at the moon, and most of the time they miss, right? And obviously you're going to want some of these guys. I remember Vikings fans were so upset when Ricky Wagner signed with the Lions instead of them, right? And like I was kind of there too. That would have been nice, but then they drafted Brian O'Neill. It was fine. I think that like there are always a couple of splash signings that are available. They don't have to be the top player on the market to qualify as a splash signing. The Grenard example is a really good one. Here, I think if the Vikings ended up spending a little bit more money than people expect on something like a Tevin Jenkins, I wouldn't be upset. And if that allowed you to free up some money to maybe go after a Drew Dahlman, who, I mean, it sounds like Atlanta wants to bring Dahlman back and that his money is even bigger than I expected. And if it's bigger than I expected, probably not great. But like as an example of a relatively efficient center signing that has a decent amount of upside, like a Drew Dahlman, Tevin Jenkins group up front might be better than a Will Fries. I don't know how to pronounce that. Position next to, keeping Garrett Bradbury there. Right. Whatever it is, they do have to make at least one upgrade there. And I would expect that to occur, at least one of them occur in free agency because A, the Vikings don't have a lot of picks, but B, difficult to fully draft 3 starting offensive linemen in one draft class. Right.
It's not like the Vikings haven't tried to get guards. Like they've invested.
No, they've
actually invested draft capital into it. But yeah, it's just highly unlikely.
Yeah, and it's really funny because people complain about the lack of investment over several years, going back to the Spielman era. And it's like, look, I know that you were not necessarily over the moon about the Wyatt Davis pick, but that does count as an investment, right? Garrett Bradbury counts as an investment. Like I'm trying to remember the other Ohio State center who's not Billy Price that they drafted.
Pat Elflein.
Pat Elflein, that counts as an investment, right? Ed Ingram, not working out, but that counts that's a second round investment. That's an investment, right? Alex Boone counts as an investment, right? But some of them just don't work out. So you do have to identify like the correct player, whether it's in the draft or the free agency. And the fact that they played really well last year isn't really a great suggestion necessarily that they'll play well this year, although that is kind of the best evidence we have available to us. So you have to be really forward-looking and not optimistic, but like careful about the way that you react to some of these signings because they could turn out better or worse than you thought. So if they don't go after the top guard, if they go after the third or fourth guard in the market, which is actually not a bad guard market, all things considered. You mentioned Patrick McCarry. Obviously, we mentioned Will and Tevin Jenkins. There's a lot of guards that are potentially available. I think the Chiefs franchise tag Trey Smith, so he's no longer available. And certainly they wouldn't let him go after they traded away Joe Thuney. But
yeah, they doubled down on that one. Like
yeah. Crazy. Sure, do whatever you want. But there's a couple of guards available, and so you don't necessarily have to go to the top one to get a significant upgrade there. That might free you up at cornerback, at center, at running back. I don't know what's going to happen there. Hopefully, I think the ideal situation is that they sign a guy. It could be Aaron Jones, it could not be, and then also draft a guy in the mid rounds. This is an insane running back class. I would behoove them to like take advantage of that fact. But you can make some investments in other places if you downgrade from the ideal, right? Which Trey Smith or whoever, right? To a really good upgrade. Like upgrades are good. You should be happy with them. I think sometimes like people see these like star players go elsewhere. And like, the Vikings, they could have been in on that guy. and like really idealistically, like they were maybe better off. Maybe the one situation where like both teams, like the Vikings essentially swapped, Danielle Hunter and Jonathan Grenard. Feels like both teams are really happy with the decisions they made there. More power to you, but that's not that common. Usually one of those two are going to fail. And so you don't necessarily be on the one, you don't want to be in the end, holding the bigger bag that ends up being the failure. So like I said, both strategic and make splash plays, because those big players will end up contributing in some way.
Is there so that's kind of your motto, let me just ask this one blanket statement and then we'll kind of close things out here. The Vikings offense, or excuse me, not offense, but the Vikings offseason will be a success if they do what?
Man, if they address, I don't know, what do they have, like 5 holes to cover up? Cornerback,
Offensive
defensive
line.
line, yeah.
Yeah, defensive line, corner, running back, and quarterback.
Well, I won't count that. Let's say safety.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So if they address 3 of those 5, I think that would be a success. Addressed in a way that makes us reasonably confident that those guys are going to be starting quality players. Typically, those guys would be upgrades over the guys that they replace, but not necessarily, right? If you get a Stephon Gilmore level corner, but he's younger, and bring back Byron Murphy, I would say the quarterback position is addressed, right? If you add one safety, I'd say the safety position is addressed. If you add one, they probably need to replace 3. But if you add one offensive lineman, I would say for the purposes of free agency, that position is addressed. And I think that you need to address at least 3 of those positions in a definitive way to say that's a starting quality player. It's not, we think that he might be good and he can compete for a spot. It's a starting quality player that is going to help your team. Then I think you're in a good spot, because not every team that wins the Super Bowl has solved every roster hole. So you don't have to be manic about plugging every single hole, right? But you need to have very few weaknesses. And so minimizing that, addressing 1 or 2 of those weaknesses in the draft. It's difficult to expect rookies to contribute right away, but the Vikings are in a position where they might have to rely on someone to do that. You'd be in a good spot. And so I think that we need to be measured in our understanding of how the Vikings are going to approach this free agency period, because they're not going to solve every problem. Even if they have 63, 65, $70 million in cap space, you can't solve every problem. So understand that, and then kind of understand like where are teams finding ways to succeed, and understanding that those teams don't always have every position solved either.
So Arif, closing out here, what's going on at the Wide Left Substack right now?
Yeah, so we're ramping up into draft season. So, I've got a discussion with another analytics firm about the way that they're evaluating draft prospects. Hopefully that'll turn into a story soon. A lot of people are pretty interested in my reporting on different football media. I'm working on a story on that. I don't know if it's a story yet, so we'll see. That's coming soon. Huge announcement coming in May. That's a while down the road. So, watch out for that. It's after the draft. But I've got a lot of plans for Wide Left. We're going to get a lot more content out there. Hopefully it's going to be high quality content. And of course, in April, as always, you have the ability to look forward to the consensus board and all of the insights that are produced from the consensus board. Who are the most polarizing players? Who are the most accurate analysts? What can we learn about the different kinds of boards that people put together? Which players, have the most opportunity to succeed based off of these differences, stuff like that. I love doing the consensus board stuff. And it seems like a lot of other people, it really resonates with them. So you can find all of that at Wide Left. You're going to find analysis of media at Wide Left. You can find analysis of football at Wide Left, analytics breakdowns, and I even delve a little bit into culture and politics. You don't have to read them, but people seem to resonate with those as well. So check that out over at wideleft.football.
And you're also, I forgot to mention this, you did a little bit, Minnesota Football Party. It is you, it is who it seems like there's more people now. So like there's Ron Johnson, there's Julia Daniels, there's Reggie Wilson. Yep.
Yeah.
I apologize. I don't live in the market, so I'm not familiar with.
Oh yeah, no, don't worry. I never see like Reggie and Julia because I'm on different days than they are. So I will also blank out. But so I'm on the Minnesota Football Party on Monday and Thursdays with Sam Ekstrom, with Luke Braun, with Luke Inman, me, and then on Thursdays with Ron Johnson. Then of course I've got Norse Code, me and James Pogashnik. Also, another podcast I've started recently. So sorry, there's like so many podcasts. 60-minute drill with Ed Zitron, who's a technology writer, and Caleb, who is an internet culture, podcaster. That's a fun one where we do a lot less NFL news type stuff and a lot more like the culture of football or kind of what's happening online around football and stuff like that. We have a lot of fun.
if you are a fan of Arif's smooth voice, you have plenty of avenues to enjoy it. Just like I can't get enough Arif. I need another podcast, and you can just log on right
It's all
there.
over the place.
He's everywhere. He is going to be difficult to defeat at WrestleMania, folks. With taking on John Cena in his heel turn, I had to get a reference in there. What do you think? Like, did you see all the Cena stuff or no?
I saw some of it. I wasn't paying super attention, but I know there was an interview he did a month ago where someone asked him, "When are they? Can you imagine a John Cena heel turn?" And he's like, "Hey, it's inevitable. Humans are flawed." So he basically said that was going to happen. And honestly, after like 20 years, he started out as a heel. I think a lot of people forget that. After 20 years going back to being a heel, I thought that's a great story beat. I think it was inevitable. It's a great way to bring him back. After he's done all this outside of wrestling stuff. I think it's great. I think he'll redeem himself eventually, but man, I think that from a wrestling storyline perspective, that was probably the best direction to go in.
I started I mean, people who listen to the podcast know I now write for the Fansided regional network. I do a lot of work with them now. And my boss actually, I think he was just making small talk because he's not a wrestling fan, but he was just like, so what do you think of the Cena heel turn? I gave him like a 5-minute response. Like it was just, I was so floored when that happened because I was just like, I knew Cody wasn't turning heel because like the whole thing was, the Rock had offered, hey, you could be my champion, but I want your soul, like Shang Tsung style, which are we going to get a Mortal Kombat fatality? That'd be kind of weird, but kind of awesome if they pulled that off in like real life. But we didn't get that. Instead, we got a Cody Rhodes F-bomb, which that left my jaw on the floor. And then a couple minutes later, Cena's got the look and he kicks him and, just phone blows up. I'm like screaming. Neighbors are like, "You okay up there?" Yeah. Don't worry. It's a wrestling night, guys. You gotta make sure it's so.
You just gotta be like, you gotta plan for that kind of stuff. Yeah,
exactly. You gotta board up the windows. Shad's watching wrestling tonight. We gotta get all this together. But regardless, I had to get my John Cena take in. But Arif, thank you for coming on. He is Arif Hasan. You can check him out. Wide Left Substack. All the podcasts that he mentioned. He's also at Arif Hasan NFL. Are you still on X or you're everywhere?
Yeah,
right?
No, I tweet on X and on Blue Sky. So I'm arif.bsky.social on Blue Sky, Arif Hasan NFL on Twitter. So
you can check it out right there. I am Chris Schad at The Real Chris Schad. We do the Viking Age podcast every week right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. And go on over, check out everything at thevikingage.com. We'll get you ready for free agency. You can get your fix there. For Arif Hasan, I am Chris Schad. This has been the Viking Age Podcast.